And in our day, we have a terrible thing happening in the Orthodox Church today. The modern life makes people very dull and makes people very lazy and makes people very easily move the truth to be something they want it to be. That happens all the time. And it's even happening in Orthodoxy. And people make small changes. I've got an article that I just wrote about baptism. Unfortunately, in many places in the world and in America, Orthodox priests are baptizing incorrectly. They're baptizing by pouring. They're not baptizing by immersion. They're just having, I wrote an article and there's a picture of somebody and they're literally bowing over a child's baptismal font and he's pouring a little bit of water on her head. And she's fully dressed, which means he's not going to chrismate her feet for sure because she's got shoes on. And it's just terrible. The thing is that when we do things, and these little small things that we might say, oh, well, it's still baptism. Well, we wouldn't rebaptize somebody who's been baptized incorrectly unless they ask it and our bishop blesses it. And I've done that. Yes.
Well, what if, the church doesn't have, a big enough baptismal pot to do immersion,
I baptized in a river. I baptized in a lake. You can baptize. And if there's really a necessity to baptize by pouring or by sprinkling, yes, it can be done. I baptized once by sprinkling. An old lady who was almost was going to die only a few days after I baptized her. It was impossible to get her into a font. It would have killed her, right? I mean, you wouldn't have been able to lift. First of all, she was pretty heavy. To lift her into a font would have been torture. So I baptized her by sprinkling. Absolutely okay to do. That's by economy. That's by exception. What's that?
My mom was baptized differently.
Well, and that's, it's not that a person, if they're baptized by sprinkling in the Orthodox Church, that we consider them not baptized, but it's wrong to do because we're breaking down our tradition. What baptism is supposed to be, an image of death and a death. It's both. It's a symbol of death and death. How is it a symbol of death?
Because when you go in the water, it represents you being buried, and then when you come out, it represents you ascending into heaven.
Okay, definitely. If you go down in water and you stay in water, what would you be? Dead. So it's like being buried, right? But coming out of the water, what are you?
You're rising.
Are you old or are you new?
New.
You're a new creature.
You're a new creature. That's right. So it's a death and a resurrection. It's a symbol of death, and it actually is a death. It's the death of the old man. Now, that is very clear by dunking somebody down in water. They come back up. You do that 3 times. Does it look very clear if you pour a little water on them?
No.
No, it doesn't. It's not the same image at all, right? So that's happening in the Orthodox Church, unfortunately. And I just have a quote from St. Photius from his life, St. Photius of Constantinople. And I just skipped the rest. His life is very complicated, very complicated. But here he said he was actually arguing with Pope Nicholas. At the time, Pope Nicholas was part of the church. They were a united church. But Pope Nicholas was trying to become, what the papacy is today. He was trying to say that I'm the head of everything. And he had certain traditions that he wanted to enforce upon the Greeks that they didn't want to do, right? Even things like unleavened bread and other such things. So he said this. He said, abolition of small things, this is St. Photius said this, abolition or stopping small things which have been received through tradition will lead to complete contempt for the dogmas. And we see that in baptism. The Romans long ago stopped doing immersion for baptism. Their baptism, their theology of baptism is horrendous. It's horrendous. They do not understand what baptism is, and they have propagated that to the rest of the world now. They basically share this idea of baptism almost like the Protestants, and the idea that everybody's baptized, no matter what form it is, no matter where, no matter what church it is. That's not true. Baptism is in the Orthodox Church, and we baptize in a proper way. But then if Orthodox Christians baptize incorrectly, if they baptize in a way that looks like Latin, then eventually people in the church are saying, oh, our baptism is the same as the Latins. We're the same. That's what's happening. So what I want you to love is our traditions, not because that you just say, I'm so good, I know this and I know that. No, but you follow the holy traditions of the church because they are sort of like a barrier that keeps out sin. That's what the parable of the vineyard is about. It talks about the wine landowner. He makes a vineyard, and what does he do? He puts a barrier around it. He puts what did he call it? A hedge around it. What is the hedge for? To keep out animals. To keep out animals, right? In our case, the hedge is we follow our traditions correctly. I baptize correctly. I chrismate correctly. When you chrismate, you're supposed to chrismate on certain parts of the body. I do them all. Which means you've got to have your shoes off and your socks off. If a person has shoes on, I wouldn't be able to baptize their feet properly, and that would be a terrible sin on my part. So we do things correctly because there's slippage otherwise. There's slippage. And then people start to believe terrible things about baptism. That's happening right now in our day in the Orthodox Church. And I'm not going to let it happen in my church. I'm going to always baptize correctly. I'm actually always going to baptize everybody.
What's unleavened bread?
Unleavened bread? Leaven is yeast.
Oh.
So you put yeast in the flour and water, and it rises because the yeast is like a small microorganism, and when it eats some parts of the bread, it gives off carbon dioxide, and it puffs up the bread, right? So that's leavened bread. The Roman Catholics use these little wafers, right? These little wafers, little white wafers. When I was Roman Catholic, we called it fish food. It looked like fish food. It literally does. It's just a wafer. It's a white wafer. And it's flat. It's like a little tiny white cracker is what it is. And we don't use unleavened bread because the Lord used leavened bread in the Last Supper. Now the Jews, for the Passover, what kind of bread did they use? Leavened or unleavened? Unleavened bread. That was on Friday. But the Lord did not have the Paschal Supper on Friday. He had it on Thursday. So he had it a day early. Can he do that?
Yes.
Yes! Of course he can do that. So he is the Pascha, right? He is our Passover. He is the Paschal Lamb. So he was celebrating the Paschal dinner with them. They did things not exactly like Pascha, like Passover, because they were not standing, right? The rules are you're supposed to be standing with your loin skirt, and a staff, and you're supposed to eat with haste, and you're supposed to eat roasted lamb and bitter herbs, and because you're supposed to remember that was the night that the Jews went quickly to flee from the Egyptians, right? Yeah. Well, he didn't. They weren't standing. They weren't eating in haste. They were actually reclining on the table, around the table. And he, of course, instituted the Eucharist on that day, and he used leavened bread, because they would be using leavened bread on Thursday night. Yes?